I used to be cured in East London. East London's a slum area. I'm not sure what we call it now. That's politically incorrect to call it a slum area. Anyway, economically challenged. And we had a very respectable church. Huge, monstrous church, Victorian built. And I was the curate. And an old boy used to come into church fairly regularly. He was what we used to call a tramp. What I learned in Canada you call a rubby-dub or a bum. But that's what he was. We never use that term in England. It meant something different. And he used to toddle into church. His name was Mr. Sinclair. I don't know why we ever knew that, but that was Mr. Sinclair. He was grubby. He was very scruffy, down at heel. And he would come in and sit in a pew, and he would turn around, put his feet in along the pew, so he was sort of half lying down, and he'd take out an old newspaper. This was usually before the service. And then when the service started, we had a magnificent choir would come toddling down the aisle, singing their little hearts out, and he would join in. He always had a different version of the hymn, but he used to bellow at the top of his voice. Anyway. One day, just before the service, one of the wardens came into the vicar's vestry and said, "Vicar, this is too much. You must ask Mr. Sinclair to leave." You see, we don't want to be contaminated by strangers and different people who are different from us. It bothers us. Vicar said, "No, he's staying as long as he likes." That was a great step forward back in those dark ages, because we were very respectable, we Church of England people. But you see, it's an attitude that somehow suggests that we're in the lifeboat, that we're all right, and it's all those other people out there that's something wrong with them. And we discover, as we start using what's entrusted for God's benefit, we start to discover that our vision widens. It's pretty hard to say where the limits are. It's pretty difficult to say at this point God's love stops, or that this person is beyond it. And that's all because I think we start to realize that none of it's ours. That when we start claiming it as if we own it and possess it, that shuts down what our understanding of God's love is. It reduces that understanding of God's love to the point where it becomes so individualistic that I say to myself, I'm all right, and I've got my doubts about everyone else. Now, you may think that's unusual in the church, but in fact, it's growing. There is a growing attitude, certainly in the West, a growing attitude that says we've got to close in and consolidate ourselves, batten down the hatches, pull up the drawbridge. No, you can't do both, can you? I'm mixing metaphors, I'm sorry, but I used to be Church of England, so that allows it. But, you know, that's what happens when you start to say, well, it's just you and me, God. And as we start to recognize that everything's entrusted to us, all of you are entrusted to me. I am entrusted to you, whether you like it or not. I didn't do the entrusting. If I'd been in charge, it might have been different, but I'm not. God chose to entrust us with one another. God chose to entrust to us the care of all kinds of people, all kinds of things, all kinds of situations, all kinds of things that are going on in our world that we're maybe thinking are not important. Woe betide us if we don't catch on pretty soon that none of it's ours, and there is a day of accounting. I'm not talking about some mammoth judgment day. I'm talking about an accountability that God says, what are you doing? there's a phrase, wouldn't like to use it, so don't tell anybody I did. But a slogan that appeared outside a church. What on earth are you doing for God's sake? Maybe it's a bit crude, but maybe we've got to think in those terms. What are we doing? See, that's where I'm going to start talking about stewardship. That's where I'm going to lay the foundation for stewardship. Long before I talk about whether we've got a budget or whether we can afford to do anything, or long before we talk about all these things, we lay that foundation. And I believe we've got to start laying that foundation in our parishes and challenging the attitude that says, well, somebody raised it over there, this idea of we've got not only got to survive, but we've got to preserve everything from the past. I asked a group of people this question. You might like to think about it. You don't need to talk to one another. That would be too much in the morning. Here's a question, and I found some fascinating answers to it. But what would happen if your church, I don't just mean the building, I mean the people who go to your church, all of them, if your church vanished? I'm not talking about the rapture or anything like that I know nothing about. I'm just talking about in this not hypothetical, this imaginary moment, just supposing tonight, around about 11:28, all the people that now belong to your parish vanish. They probably go to BC somewhere, but they vanish. Church building still there. What would be noticed first by the community? What would they notice first?
Bishop, you did say the building would remain.
The building's still there. I had to put that in because the first time I asked, I said, what would the first thing they notice? And someone said, a great big hole in the ground. So the building is still there. It looks as if the same as it does this morning, but the people who normally occupy the pews are not there anymore. What's happening? I mean, you're not going to disappear as far as I know, but we've got to start asking this kind of question. What difference do we make? What difference do we make as church? Well, we've got some ideas. Feeding people, caring for people, visiting people. I used to be the parish priest in a place called Fort St. John on the Alaska Highway. Interesting place. And the little hospital there, one of my children was born there. Born in the middle of a sermon, would you believe? He's never listened to a sermon since. And I used to visit the hospital. And I was visiting around and someone said to me, a patient said to me, you haven't visited me lately? I said, no, I've just got back from vacation. No one from the church came to see me. And I said, I'm surprised. Your doctor, Dr. Jack Temple, is part of our community, as you know. He's there every Sunday. The radiographer, she's there every Sunday. The staff nurse, the church has been visiting you all day, every day. Oh. What she really meant was that I hadn't been there. And if I didn't go, the church was absent. We've got to start helping people recognize that wherever they are church. Whatever they're doing, and I don't mean that they've always got to be talking about being a member of St. what's its name's in the swamp, but that they are in fact church, because everything we have and everything we are already belongs to God. And so whatever I do, it's all taking God into account. What else can we ask you? What would you like people to say about your parish not to you because they'll be nice and kind and loving, but if you're not around, what would you like people to be saying about your parish?
I felt accepted.
Say that again.
I felt accepted.
Accepted. If a person comes into church, I felt accepted. Yeah. Yeah. Here's a group that cares. Yeah, thank you. Yep.
That we meet people and are relevant to how they want to be today.
We meet people where they are in their lives. Is that right? Yep. We're not self-centered. We're not self-satisfied. That's the sort of thing you want people to say about you? They don't seem to be worried about themselves so much as they are concerned about other people. They contribute to the life of the community. I've had some fun just lately because the provincial government and the municipal governments in British Columbia are starting to, there are little rumbles going around saying, we wonder why we give tax exemption to church property. We wonder. We've got a huge deficit all over the place. We wonder why we're giving charitable status to churches. What does the municipality, what does the city gain from it? And some of the, I don't know whether it'll ever happen, but some of the parishes are starting to say, my goodness, we really are living to ourselves. Everything we do is so that we will keep on doing. All our activities are essentially to keep us going. And I hear government starting to say, why should the rest of the taxpayers just simply keep you going?